noticed that none of the adults consumed the food that had been prepared. Instead, they sat quietly while he ate, engaging in polite conversation, but politely declining to participate in the meal, despite having graciously invited him to join them. When he commented on their apparent lack of appetite, his hosts explained that their dietary requirements were simply different from those of visitors, and that they typically ate at different times to avoid making guests uncomfortable. This explanation might have been acceptable if Merriweather hadn't observed strikingly similar behavior throughout the settlement during his entire stay. In 3 days, he never once saw any resident of Quinlan Valley consume normal food or engage in typical meal preparation activities. Even more disturbing were the sounds that emanated from the settlement during the nighttime hours. Merriweather vividly described hearing what sounded like large groups of people moving through the valley in a coordinated, almost orchestrated fashion. Yet when he peered outside during these episodes, he could see no one. The sound clearly suggested organized activity involving dozens of individuals, but the settlement appeared completely deserted whenever he attempted to investigate. On his final morning, as his guides prepared to escort him back to civilization, Merriweather attempted to create a detailed map of Quinlan Valley's location for future reference. His guides became visibly agitated when they observed this activity, insisting, with an unsettling intensity, that such documentation was unnecessary and potentially dangerous for reasons they would not specify. When he persisted in his efforts, they physically removed his mapping materials and meticulously destroyed his notes, explaining with an unnerving calm that outsiders were simply not permitted to maintain permanent records of their community's location. The return journey to Charleston took only 1 day, following roads and paths that Merriweather was absolutely certain they had not used during their outbound travel. When he attempted to question his guides about this apparent inconsistency, they maintained with unsettling composure that they were simply taking a more direct route that had not been practical while carrying the medical supplies he had brought to treat their sick, Dr. Jonathan. Merriweather never saw his guides again after they delivered him back to his office in Charleston, and he never received payment for his services, despite the generous compensation they had promised. When he attempted to return to Quinlan Valley several months later, his efforts proved futile. He was utterly unable to locate any of the trails or landmarks he remembered from his original journey. Most significantly, when he consulted with other physicians and officials in the region about the community he had visited, none had any knowledge whatsoever of a Welsh settlement called Quinlan Valley. Land surveys, tax records, and census data for the areas he had traveled through showed no evidence of permanent habitation. According to all official sources, the remote valleys where he had spent 3 bewildering days treating mysterious patients were, and always had been, completely uninhabited wilderness. I discovered Dr. Merriweather's journal in 1998, and it immediately seized the entire focus of my research efforts. Using his meticulously detailed descriptions and the geographical references he had managed to record before his guides so violently destroyed his notes, I spent 2 years of my life, tirelessly attempting to locate Quinlan Valley, using every modern surveying technique and satellite imagery at my disposal. The search was, in a sense, ultimately successful, though what I found raised far more questions than it answered. In a remote valley that matched Merriweather's description perfectly, I discovered the ruins of approximately 40 stone structures, arranged precisely as he had described. The construction techniques were indeed remarkably sophisticated, incorporating architectural elements that I had never, in all my years of study, encountered in any other Appalachian settlements of that period. But the ruins showed clear evidence of having been abandoned for decades, perhaps even centuries. The agricultural terraces were completely overgrown, swallowed by the relentless wilderness. The stone houses had partially collapsed, and there were absolutely no artifacts or personal belongings that would indicate any recent habitation. Carbon dating of wooden structural elements suggested that the settlement had been constructed in the early 1800s and abandoned by the mid-1900s. Most disturbing of all was my discovery of what appeared to be a community cemetery, nestled on a hillside overlooking the settlement. The burial ground contained approximately 200 graves, each marked with a stone monument bearing Welsh names and dates spanning from 1834 to 1889. According to these chilling markers, The final burial in Quinellen Valley had occurred just 2 years after Dr. Merriweather's profoundly unsettling visit. I have never published my findings regarding Quinellen Valley, and I have absolutely no intention of ever doing so. The questions raised by this discovery challenge such fundamental assumptions about historical documentation and the very reliability of official records that I am simply not prepared to address them in an academic context. But sometimes when I'm working late in my office at the university, the quiet hush broken only by the hum of my computer, I find myself compulsively reviewing Dr. Merriweather's journal. I wonder about the true nature of the illness he had been summoned to treat. His vivid description of symptoms that occurred in cycles, of patients who desperately avoided sunlight, and of a community where no one, absolutely no one, seemed to eat normal food, suggests possibilities that no rational academic, no grounded historian, should ever dare to consider. I am now approaching retirement, and my lifelong research into Appalachian settlement patterns will conclude with my departure from the university. The precise location of Quinellen Valley will remain my secret, a silent testament to a world that defies explanation, and Dr. Merriweather's journal will be returned to the archives, where it can wait patiently for some future researcher, perhaps one with a more open mind, or a less fragile grasp on reality, who might be better equipped to understand what we found in those ancient whispering mountains. The unsettling truth is, some historical mysteries are simply better left unsolved, their secrets guarded by the silence of the hills. What if their aversion to sunlight wasn't merely a symptom, but a necessity? What if their cyclical illness and peculiar diet pointed to an existence beyond our biological understanding, a form of life sustained by something else entirely, something primal and unseen? The sheer absence of children for decades, coupled with their stable population, conjures images that refuse to be neatly filed away by academic logic. I've often felt in the deep quiet of the night as if Quinellen Valley itself watched me, its ancient stones holding a breath no human could ever exhale. The thought of bringing such a narrative, so steeped in the impossible, into the rigid world of academia feels not just irresponsible, but dangerous, as if by giving it a voice, I would somehow reawaken something that has thankfully remained dormant. Some truths are meant to stay buried, whispering only to those who truly listen and then choose silence. It all began, as many of my more fascinating discoveries have, with a serendipitous stumble. While poring over obscure 19th century settlement records, the kind of painstaking work that usually only excites someone like me, I unearthed something so profoundly unsettling that I immediately canceled all my planned field research. My name is Professor Edmund Hartwell, and for a quarter of a century, I've devoted my life to dissecting the intricate tapestry of European immigration and settlement patterns in the Appalachian Mountains, specifically between 1820 and 1890. My passion lies in those isolated pockets of humanity, communities that nestled themselves deep in remote mountain valleys, often forging unique cultural practices that drifted far from the mainstream American society of their time. The research that led to my most disturbing revelation started innocently enough. Buried within the dusty archives of the West Virginia Historical Society, I was meticulously sifting through land grant records for a book I was drafting on Welsh mining communities in the region when I kept encountering repeated, almost ghostly, references to a settlement named Quinellen Valley. The name itself was unmistakably Welsh, but the location descriptions were maddeningly vague, always just remote highlands or beyond the settled districts. What truly caught my attention, however, was the sheer consistency of these references. They appeared across multiple document types, spanning nearly 7 decades. Immigration records, meticulous land surveys, census data, even church records. Quinellen Valley was there, mentioned again and again, yet not a single document offered sufficient detail to pinpoint its exact location. Even more puzzling was the fact that this supposed settlement seemed to have maintained a remarkably stable population of around 200 residents throughout this entire period, despite having no discernible economic foundation or any apparent connection to larger transportation networks. Traditional Welsh settlements in Appalachia typically formed around the bedrock of mining operations or agricultural opportunities, the very things that could sustain a permanent community. These groups usually maintained regular contact with the outside world through trade and family ties to other Welsh communities scattered across Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Quinellen Valley, however, seemed to defy every established pattern of immigrant settlement behavior I had ever studied. My initial thought was that Quinellen Valley must be a religious community, one that had deliberately chosen to isolate itself from the mainstream, much like the Amish settlements flourishing in Pennsylvania during that same era. Many Welsh immigrants brought with them fervent Methodist or Presbyterian traditions, which sometimes led to the formation of separatist communities focused on preserving their traditional religious practices without outside interference. But as I delved deeper into the available records, this explanation began to fray and ultimately unravel. Religious communities, almost by their very nature, tend to leave behind extensive documentation of their beliefs and practices, both for internal use and to maintain vital connections with similar groups elsewhere. Quinellen Valley, while appearing in official secular records, left absolutely no trace of religious documentation. No church records, no theological writings, no correspondence with established Welsh religious organizations. It was as if their faith, if they had any, was entirely self-contained and invisible to the outside world. The true breakthrough in my research, the moment that sent a shiver down my academic spine, came when I discovered a collection of personal papers donated to the Historical Society by the estate of Dr. Jonathan Merriweather. He was a physician who had practiced in the rugged mountain regions of West Virginia during the 1880s. Tucked away among his medical journals and correspondence, I found a series of detailed, almost frantic notes describing a visit he had made to Quinellen Valley in the autumn of 1887. Dr. Merriweather had been summoned to this remote settlement to treat what was simply described as an outbreak of a mysterious illness affecting multiple families. His journal entries provide the only first-hand account I have ever encountered of life within this profoundly isolated community, and the details he meticulously recorded continue to raise questions that, even 35 years later, I still struggle to answer. According to Merriweather's notes, two men from Quinellen Valley, their faces unreadable, appeared at his office in Charleston one Tuesday morning in October 1887. They offered no names, but presented a compelling proposition: his standard fee, plus substantial travel expenses if he would accompany them immediately to treat their sick. The sheer urgency of their request, coupled with the surprisingly generous payment they offered, swayed him to agree, despite their stubborn refusal to describe the nature of the illness or provide any specific details about their community's location. The journey to Quinellen Valley stretched over 3 arduous days, leading him through increasingly remote and unforgiving mountain terrain. Merriweather observed that his guides seemed to possess an innate knowledge of paths and routes that simply didn't exist on any maps he carried, leading him through areas that showed no signs of regular human passage. By the second day, they had left behind all established roads, following what appeared to be ancient trails that wound through valleys and over ridges in patterns that seemed almost deliberately designed to avoid any contact with settled areas. When they finally reached Quinellen Valley on the evening of the 3rd day, Merriweather found a community that defied his expectations in almost every conceivable way. The settlement consisted of approximately 40 stone houses, artfully arranged around a central common area. Their construction techniques, he noted with a hint of awe, were remarkably advanced for such an isolated location. The houses were ingeniously built into the hillsides, making them nearly invisible from the valley floor, and the agricultural terraces surrounding the settlement bore clear evidence of sophisticated farming methods, perfectly adapted to maximize production in such difficult terrain. But it was the people of Quinellen Valley who truly bewildered Dr. Merriweather. While they were undeniably of Welsh origin, speaking a dialect he recognized but couldn't quite grasp entirely, their physical appearance and behavioral patterns were unlike any immigrant community he had encountered in his extensive practice. The adults were uniformly tall and lean, their skin so pale it seemed almost translucent, and their eyes reflected light in a way that reminded him more of nocturnal animals than of normal humans. Even more disturbing was their apparent age distribution. Merriweather noted that while the community claimed a population of nearly 200 residents, he encountered no children during his entire 3-day stay, and only a handful of adults who appeared to be under the age of 40. When he cautiously inquired about families and children, his questions were met with vague deflections, references to seasonal migrations, and educational arrangements that were never clearly explained, leaving him with an unsettling sense of unease. The illness that had prompted his urgent visit proved to be unlike anything in his vast medical experience. The affected individuals, numbering around 20 adults, were suffering from what appeared to be a debilitating wasting condition. It caused rapid weight loss, an extreme sensitivity to sunlight, and a peculiar, almost unnatural aversion to certain foods that had previously been dietary staples. Most puzzling was the cyclical nature of the symptoms, with patients experiencing periods of apparent recovery, only to be followed by sudden, often more severe relapses. Meriwether's extensive medical training had not prepared him for such a condition, and his usual remedies seemed to have no effect whatsoever on the progression of the symptoms. When he attempted to discuss possible causes with the settlement's informal leaders, he was calmly informed that the illness was merely a seasonal affliction that had plagued their community for generations. They expressed no surprise, no disappointment at his inability to provide effective treatment, suggesting that they had brought him to Quinellen Valley more out of some deep-seated obligation than from any genuine expectation that he could actually help. On his final evening in the settlement, Dr. Meriwether made a series of observations that fundamentally challenged his understanding of human social organization. While sharing dinner with one of the families, I buried this memory so deeply that for years I truly convinced myself it was nothing more than a childhood nightmare. It stayed locked away until last Thanksgiving, when my sister casually brought up that camping trip over dinner, and suddenly the past crashed back into the present. My name is Rebecca Williams, and what I'm about to tell you happened when I was just 8 years old. During the summer of 1994, my family had recently moved from the bustling city of Cardiff, Wales, to a quiet small town nestled in western North Carolina. My father had taken a new job as a mining engineer, helping a company reopen some of the old copper mines in the Appalachian foothills. It was a huge change for my sister Emily and me. We'd left behind all our friends and our extended family in Wales, starting fresh in a place that felt utterly foreign and strange. To help us settle in and feel at home, my parents decided to plan a series of weekend camping trips throughout that first summer. My father, David Williams, had always been an avid outdoorsman back in Wales, and he genuinely believed that exploring the American wilderness would help us fall in love with our new country, much as he had with the rugged beauty of Snowdonia. My mother, Margaret, wasn't quite as enthusiastic about sleeping on the ground, but she supported the idea, seeing it as a wonderful way to forge new family memories in our new homeland. The camping trip that would change everything was set for the very last weekend in July. Our plan was to spend 3 days at a remote campground deep within the Pisgah National Forest, an area celebrated for its crystal-clear mountain streams and ancient, old-growth forests that had somehow miraculously survived the extensive logging operations of the early 20th century. My father had specifically chosen this location because it was far from any established hiking trails or typical tourist attractions, a place where we could experience what he called true wilderness. The campground itself was incredibly primitive, accessible only by a narrow, winding dirt road that snaked through dense forest for almost 8 kilometers from the nearest paved highway. There were no facilities, no designated campsites, and chillingly, no other visitors during our entire stay. We pitched our tents in a small clearing right beside a creek that my father, meticulously consulting his topographic map, identified as Whisper Branch. I never fully understood why it carried that particular name until years later, when its significance became terrifyingly clear. Emily, who was 11 and always much more adventurous than I, immediately started exploring the area around our camp, while my parents busied themselves setting up equipment and organizing our supplies. I was always the more cautious one, preferring to stay close to the familiar comfort of our blue canvas tents and the comforting hiss of the camp stove, where my mother was already preparing our first meal. But even from the safety of our established campsite, I could feel it, something profoundly different about this place, setting it apart from every other location we had visited. The forest here was ancient, vast and denser than anywhere we had ever camped before. The trees were colossal, their trunks so enormous it would take several people holding hands to encircle them. Their canopy was so impossibly thick that even at midday, the light filtering down to the forest floor was dim and green, creating an almost underwater quality that made everything seem muted and distant. The understory was surprisingly sparse, as if the giant trees consumed most of the available sunlight and nutrients, leaving little for smaller plants to establish themselves. But it was the silence that disturbed me most deeply. In all our previous camping experiences, the woods had always been alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, small animals rustling through fallen leaves. Here, the quiet was so absolute that I could hear my own heartbeat, and the sound of my breathing seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in the stillness. Even Whisper Branch lived up to its name, flowing past our camp with barely a murmur, despite recent rains that should have made it run higher and faster. On our first evening, as we sat around the flickering campfire eating my mother's comforting camp stew, Emily announced with an excited grin that she had found something interesting during her afternoon exploration. About half a kilometer upstream from our camp, she had discovered what appeared to be the remains of an old homestead. Stone foundations clearly outlined where a cabin had once stood, and scattered around the ruins were rusted pieces of farm equipment and household items that looked like they had been abandoned for decades. My father was immediately intrigued, both as a mining engineer who understood the history of settlement in these mountains, and as a transplanted Welshman who deeply appreciated the stories old ruins could tell. He suggested we hike to the site together the following morning to investigate Emily's discovery more thoroughly. My mother was less enthusiastic, mentioning quite reasonably that abandoned homesteads could be dangerous due to collapsed structures and old, improperly covered wells. That night, I had the first of what I would later remember as dreams, but now understand were something else entirely. I found myself standing alone at the edge of our campsite in what appeared to be the middle of the night. The campfire had burned down to glowing coals, casting eerie shadows, and my parents' tent was utterly silent. Emily's sleeping bag in the tent I shared with her was empty, though I had no memory of her getting up or leaving. The forest around our camp, which had been unnaturally quiet during the day, was now filled with sound. But these were not the normal sounds of nocturnal wildlife. What I heard was undeniably human activity, voices speaking in low, hushed tones just beyond the edge of the firelight. The sound of footsteps moving through the underbrush with careful, deliberate steps, almost a rhythmic padding. Occasionally, I could make out what sounded like children laughing, but the laughter had a quality, a brittle, ancient sound that made me want to hide rather than investigate. As I stood there in my pajamas, too frightened to move, but unable to return to the perceived safety of our tent, I became aware that the voices and footsteps were getting closer, not approaching our camp directly, but circling it at a consistent distance, as if the speakers were following an invisible boundary they could not, or would not, cross. I tried to call for my parents, but no sound came from my throat, only a dry gasp. I tried to run back to our tent, but my legs wouldn't respond to my desperate commands. I could only stand there, frozen with terror, as the sounds continued their slow, deliberate circuit around our campsite. The voices grew clearer as they drew nearer, and I began to realize that they weren't speaking English. The language was unfamiliar, alien, but somehow seemed older, as if it predated any modern tongue, a primal murmur. The circling continued for what felt like hours, though I had no way to measure time in that twilight state between sleeping and waking, a place suspended between fear and oblivion. Eventually, the voices began to fade, and the footsteps grew more distant until, once again, the forest returned to its unnatural, oppressive silence. Only then was I able to move, my stiff limbs finally obeying, and I rushed back to our tent, where I found Emily sleeping peacefully in her bag, exactly as she had been, with no sign that she had ever left. I woke the next morning convinced that I had experienced nothing more than a vivid nightmare, a product of an overactive imagination fueled by sleeping in an unfamiliar and somewhat spooky place. My family showed no signs of having been disturbed during the night, and our campsite appeared exactly as we had left it before going to sleep. When Emily asked if I wanted to join the expedition to explore the old homestead she had discovered, I agreed readily, even eagerly. I wanted to focus on daytime adventures and push away those unsettling nighttime fears. The hike to the ruins took us through some of the most breathtaking forest I had ever seen, following Whisper Branch as it wound deeper into the mountains through a landscape that seemed utterly untouched by human activity, pristine and ancient. Emily led us confidently along what appeared to be an old trail, though it was so overgrown that it was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor, more a suggestion than a path. When we finally reached the homestead ruins, I immediately understood why Emily had been so excited by her discovery. The stone foundations were substantial, clearly indicating that this had been a significant structure, far more than just a simple cabin. The arrangement of rooms suggested a main living area, separate bedrooms, and what appeared to have been a large kitchen with a massive stone hearth that remained partially intact, a silent testament to past lives. My father, with his engineer's eye, examined the construction techniques and concluded that the building had probably been erected in the late 1800s, during the period when mining and logging operations had brought the first wave of permanent settlers to this part of the mountains. The quality of the stonework suggested that whoever had built this homestead had intended it to last for generations, a legacy in stone. But there were aspects of the site that troubled him, a subtle disquiet in his observations. The location, while beautiful, was remarkably impractical for farming due to the steep terrain and heavy forest cover. There was no obvious source of flat land suitable for crops or pasture for livestock. Most puzzling, however, was the complete absence of any clear access route that would have allowed the original builders to transport heavy materials to this remote location. How had they moved those enormous stones? While my parents explored the foundations and speculated about the identity of the original inhabitants, Emily and I wandered through the scattered artifacts that remained around the ruins, little fragments of a forgotten past. Most were too rusted or damaged to identify, but we found pieces of cast iron cookware, fragments of ceramic dishes, and what appeared to be the remains of furniture that had been exposed to decades of harsh weather. It was Emily who made the discovery that truly transformed our understanding of the site. In what had probably been the main living area, partially buried under decades of fallen leaves and earth, she uncovered a collection of carved wooden objects. They were small, no larger than my hand, and appeared to have been crafted with considerable skill and care. The carvings depicted human figures, but they were stylized in a way that made them seem more like symbols or effigies than realistic representations of people. My father examined the carvings with growing concern, a furrow appearing between his brows. The artistic style was unlike anything he had encountered in his extensive research into Appalachian folk culture. The figures were elongated and angular, with features that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle from which you viewed them, almost alive. Most disturbing were the expressions on the carved faces, which conveyed emotions that seemed too complex, too ancient, and too dark for simple folk art. As we prepared to return to our campsite, Emily made one final discovery that would haunt us for years to come. Behind the ruins of the main house, she found a smaller foundation that had been almost completely hidden by dense undergrowth. This structure was markedly different from the main building, constructed with stones that had been arranged in intricate patterns rather than simply stacked for structural stability. The pattern was geometric but organic, eerily similar to the carvings we had found, but executed on a much larger, more imposing scale. My father spent considerable time studying the arrangement, taking photographs and making careful sketches in his notebook, a rare intensity in his usually calm demeanor. When Emily asked what he thought the smaller building had been used for, he was quiet for a long, heavy moment before finally saying, his voice hushed, that he honestly did not know. That night, the dreams returned with greater intensity and terrifying clarity than ever before. Again, I found myself standing alone at the edge of our campsite in the middle of the night, suspended in that eerie stillness. But this time, the voices circling our camp were no longer mysterious and distant. I could understand them perfectly, as if they were speaking directly into my mind rather than merely through my ears, their words echoing inside my skull. They were calling my name, sweet and insistent, inviting me to join them, promising to show me things that would help me understand the true history of this place, whispering secrets only the forest knew. The temptation to follow those voices was almost overwhelming, a powerful magnetic pull. Every rational instinct screamed that walking into that dark, ancient forest would be a terrible, irreversible mistake. But the curiosity was stronger, a primal urge that eclipsed the fear. I found myself taking small, hesitant steps away from our campsite, drawn toward the sounds that seemed to promise answers to questions I hadn't even known how to ask, a knowledge too vast for a child. I had made it perhaps 20 meters from our tents when Emily suddenly appeared beside me, though I had no memory of her approaching, no sound of her footsteps. She took my hand without saying a word and began leading me gently but firmly back toward the perceived safety of our camp, her grip surprisingly strong. As we walked, she spoke, her voice soft and low, in the same language I had been hearing from the forest, responding to the voices that were still calling my name, still coaxing me away. It was only when we reached our tent, the canvas cool against my cheek, that I suddenly realized Emily was still sleeping peacefully in her bag, exactly where she had been when I left. The Emily who had led me back to safety dissolved like morning fog, fading into the shadows, leaving me alone with the chilling understanding that something in those ancient woods had been wearing the face of my sister, a benevolent specter, to keep me safe from whatever else was calling to me in the impenetrable darkness. We broke camp the very next morning, packing up in a hurried, almost frantic manner, and returned home 3 days earlier than planned. My parents never offered a full explanation for the sudden change in our itinerary, but I noticed that my father spent considerable time on the phone with various officials after we returned, his voice often hushed and serious, and he never, ever scheduled another camping trip to the Pisgah National Forest. For 30 long years, I convinced myself that the entire experience had been nothing more than childhood imagination, amplified by sleeping in an unfamiliar, unsettling environment. I never spoke about the dreams, or the voices, or the mysterious Emily who had led me back to safety. When family conversations inevitably turned to our camping adventures, I participated in the nostalgic reminiscences, laughing along, without ever mentioning the things that had frightened me so deeply, the things that still whispered at the edges of my memory. But last Thanksgiving, Emily brought up that particular camping trip in a way that utterly shattered my carefully constructed rationalization, tearing down the walls I had built around that time. She mentioned, quite casually, that she had never been able to sleep properly during our time at Whisper Branch because she kept having to get up at night to bring me back to our tent. According to her memory, I had sleepwalked repeatedly during our stay, wandering off into the darkness, and she had spent most of those nights awake and vigilant, watching to make sure I didn't wander into the forest alone, a silent guardian. When I asked her, my voice barely a whisper, what she meant, she described incidents that matched perfectly with my own fragmented memories of those terrifying nighttime experiences. She remembered the voices calling from the woods, though she claimed she could never understand what they were saying, just a compelling ancient sound. She remembered the sense of something circling our campsite, testing the boundaries of our small, fragile, safe space. Most significantly, she remembered that the voices had been specifically calling for me, beckoning me, trying to lure me away from our family and into the unfathomable darkness beyond our campfire. Emily told me that she had never felt comfortable discussing those experiences because she was afraid people would think she was making up stories or had been overly influenced by too many horror movies. But after 30 years, she felt that we were both old enough to acknowledge that something genuinely frightening, something beyond our comprehension, had happened during that camping trip, something that neither of us had been equipped to understand or process at the time. She also told me something that I had never known, a revelation that truly solidified the impossibility of it all. On our final morning at the campsite, while we were packing our equipment, she had walked back to the homestead ruins one more time. Her intention was to retrieve a small carving she had hidden earlier, rather than showing it to our parents, feeling an inexplicable attachment to it. But when she reached the site, she found that all evidence of human habitation had vanished, utterly, completely. The stone foundations were gone, the scattered artifacts had disappeared as if they were never there, and the forest floor showed no signs that any structure had ever existed in that location. According to Emily, she searched for over an hour, convinced that she had somehow lost her way and gone to the wrong location, disoriented. But Whisper Branch was there, flowing past the site exactly as she remembered. The colossal trees were the same. The terrain was unchanged, every mossy rock and twisted root in its place. Everything was identical except for the complete, baffling absence of the ruins we had explored in such detail just the day before. She never told our parents about this discovery because she was afraid they wouldn't believe her, that they would dismiss her story as a child's fantasy. Instead, she secretly kept the carved figure she had taken from the site, hiding it in her room as concrete evidence that the homestead had really existed, a tangible link to the impossible. But within a week of our return home, the carving had changed. The human figure had become something else, something with features too disturbing, too alien for an 11-year-old to look at comfortably, shifting and distorting into something monstrous. Eventually terrified, she buried it in our backyard. And to her knowledge, it remains there still. A buried secret festering beneath the suburban lawn. I am now 38 years old, married with 2 children of my own. We live in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, far removed from the rugged mountains where these events occurred. My husband knows nothing about my childhood experiences in the Appalachian wilderness. I've carefully built a life where those memories have no place, and I have no intention of ever sharing these unsettling stories with him or our children. But sometimes on still summer nights when the air is thick and quiet, a profound silence settles, and I find myself instinctively listening. I listen for voices that might be calling my name from whatever dark, ancient places still exist in this modern, supposedly rational world. And sometimes in that hushed quiet, I truly think I hear them, patient and persistent, still trying to finish a conversation that began 30 years ago beside Whisper Branch, in a forest that may or may not have ever truly existed, but has certainly existed within me, shaping who I am, a constant, unsettling echo. The experience left an indelible mark, a whisper that lingers even now, raising questions about the permeable boundaries between memory and reality, the seen and the unseen. It taught me, perhaps unwillingly, that some places hold stories too ancient and too powerful for human understanding, and that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Sometimes the most profound knowledge lies in acknowledging what we cannot explain, what simply is. It reminds me that even in the most familiar settings, just beneath the surface of the mundane, there can lie an entirely different kind of truth, a primal magic or a forgotten horror waiting for an opportune moment, a child's curious heart to resurface and claim its due. The mountains hold their secrets, and sometimes they choose to share them, whether we are ready or not. Our wildlife tracking study was meant to last for half a year, but we packed up and left after a mere 3 weeks. To this day, I have never published our findings. My name is Dr. Patricia McKenzie, and I'm a wildlife biologist. For 12 years, I've dedicated myself to understanding the intricate dance of predator and prey in North American forest ecosystems, from Canada to the northern United States. My work has always focused on how apex predators adapt their hunting strategies in the face of environmental shifts and human encroachment on their age-old territories. But the project that ultimately brought my field, research career, to an abrupt end began in the spring of 2021. I'd secured funding from the Canadian Wildlife Service for an ambitious study of black bear populations in a particularly remote stretch of the Appalachian Mountains, spanning from eastern Quebec into northern Maine. This region had always been a mystery, largely untouched by scientific inquiry due to its sheer inaccessibility and the vast private land holdings that had historically barred researchers. My team was comprised of 3 sharp graduate students from the University of New Brunswick and 2 seasoned field technicians, whose expertise lay in tracking and monitoring large mammals. Our plan was meticulous. Establish a network of remote monitoring stations across approximately 500 square kilometers of pristine, old-growth forest. We'd deploy trail cameras, radio collars, and GPS devices, aiming to meticulously document bear behavior throughout the summer and early autumn. This was truly untouched wilderness, a place virtually immune to logging or development, where the dense canopy coverage and rugged terrain had remained unchanged for millennia. Historical records suggested a healthy abundance of black bears, white-tailed deer, and various smaller predators, yet not a single systematic scientific study had ever been conducted here, precisely because of the challenging access and profound remoteness. Our base camp was set up at the southern edge of our designated study area, nestled beside a small lake that offered both vital water access and a crucial helicopter landing site for supply drops. The nearest road was over 40 kilometers away, traversing terrain utterly impassable to vehicles, leaving us entirely reliant on helicopter support for transportation and any communication with the outside world. The first unsettling hint that something profoundly unusual was unfolding in our study area arrived during our initial survey work, barely 2 weeks into May. As we meticulously established GPS coordinates for our monitoring stations, we began to discover evidence of bear activity that simply didn't fit any documented behavioral patterns in scientific literature. We encountered what appeared to be deliberately constructed arrangements of stones and fallen logs, always in locations that showed significant bear traffic. These structures served no obvious practical purpose related to feeding, denning, or territorial marking. They were too intricate, too systematic to be random environmental formations. Yet they displayed engineering principles that seemed far beyond the recognized cognitive capabilities of black bears. Even more perplexing was the discovery of trees that had been systematically stripped of bark, not in the haphazard way of a bear foraging, but in patterns suggesting tool use. The stripping was unnervingly precise and organized, consistent across multiple locations separated by several kilometers. Whatever was creating these marks was following deliberate design principles, implying planning and coordination. My graduate student, Michael Chen, diligently documented over 200 examples of these anomalous markings within our first 10 days in the field. Photography and GPS mapping confirmed they occurred at regular intervals along what seemed to be established travel routes through the forest. The pattern was clear. Bears in this region had developed behavioral adaptations never before observed in other populations. But what truly began to unnerve us was the perplexing absence of normal bear signs. Despite overwhelming evidence of a substantial bear population based on the extensive markings and structural modifications we were documenting, we hadn't seen a single bear directly, nor had our trail cameras captured any. We found no scat, no footprints, no telltale hair samples snagged on trees or rocks. It was as if the bears in this region were deliberately avoiding all forms of detection, while simultaneously leaving behind undeniable proof of their highly organized activities. The real breakthrough, or perhaps the terrifying realization, struck during our third week when our motion-activated cameras finally began recording footage. It forced us to fundamentally reconsider everything we thought we knew about bear behavior and intelligence. The initial recordings were captured at night by cameras strategically placed along what we'd identified as primary travel corridors. The footage was chilling. Groups of black bears moving through the forest in single-file formation, following precise, almost military-like routes, maintaining consistent spacing between individuals. This level of organization was utterly unprecedented in bear research, suggesting social coordination capabilities that directly contradicted decades of established behavioral studies. More disturbing still were the subsequent recordings, which depicted bears engaged in what could only be described as construction activities. Using rocks, fallen logs, and the very stripped bark materials we'd observed, groups of bears were systematically building structures that defied any identifiable biological purpose. The construction process was coordinated and methodical. Individual bears appeared to be assigned specific roles in completing complex projects that often required multiple nights to finish. The structures themselves defied explanation within the context of normal animal behavior. They were geometric rather than organic, incorporating architectural principles that demanded spatial reasoning and planning capabilities far beyond anything previously documented in bear populations. Some seemed to be communication devices, arranged to channel sound in specific directions across long distances. Others appeared designed to create specific visual effects when viewed from particular angles. Most unsettling of all was the dawning realization that the bears were acutely aware of our presence and were deliberately modifying their behavior to avoid direct contact with our research team. Our trail cameras captured footage of bears systematically dismantling and relocating our monitoring equipment, always at night, and always with a meticulous precision that left the devices undamaged, but repositioned to record empty forest rather than any bear activity. The bears weren't just avoiding our cameras. They were studying our research methods and adapting their behavior to render our scientific observations utterly ineffective. The incident that ultimately ended our research unfolded during our final week at the study site. Michael Chen, with his usual boundless enthusiasm, had volunteered for overnight observation duty at one of our most remote monitoring stations. He hoped to finally document bear activity through direct observation, rather than relying on automated cameras that the bears had proven so adept at circumventing. The monitoring station was positioned on a rocky outcropping, offering clear sight lines across a valley where we had observed the most extensive structural modifications. Michael was fully equipped, night vision gear, radio communication, and emergency supplies sufficient for 48 hours of independent observation. His final radio transmission, crackling through at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, has haunted me ever since. Dr. Mackenzie, you need to see this. They are not bears. Repeat, they are not bears. They are something else entirely, and they know I am watching them. When we lost contact with Michael, standard protocol dictated notifying our helicopter support and initiating immediate extraction procedures. But, inexplicably, our primary radio equipment malfunctioned simultaneously with Michael's disappearance, leaving us completely unable to communicate with our logistical support team. We were effectively stranded at our base camp with no way to call for help and no clear understanding of what had happened to our colleague. I immediately organized a search team to reach Michael's observation post, following the marked trails we had established during our initial survey work. The hike was arduous, taking most of the day through incredibly difficult terrain, and we didn't reach the monitoring station until late afternoon. What we found there challenged every single assumption I had ever held about wildlife behavior and the very nature of intelligence in non-human species. The observation post had been systematically dismantled and then meticulously reconstructed in a configuration that served no apparent practical purpose. Michael's equipment had been carefully arranged in geometric patterns around the site, undamaged, but positioned according to design principles that suggested an artistic or symbolic intent rather than random disturbance. Michael himself was nowhere to be found, but his absence was clearly deliberate, not accidental. His personal belongings had been sorted and arranged according to size, color, and material composition. His research notes had been removed from his backpack and spread across the ground in patterns eerily reminiscent of the structural modifications we had been documenting throughout our study. Most significantly, we found undeniable evidence that whatever had taken Michael had left behind a message, intended specifically for our research team. Using stones arranged in precise geometric patterns, someone or something had created symbols that incorporated elements of our GPS mapping system, our camera placement strategies, and our data collection protocols. The message was unmistakable. It was meant to demonstrate that our research methods had been observed, understood, and ultimately rendered ineffective by entities with intelligence capabilities that profoundly exceeded our own. The final chilling element of this message was a detailed reproduction of our helicopter landing schedule, created using materials from Michael's equipment and positioned to be perfectly visible from the air. Whatever had taken Michael knew exactly when our extraction was scheduled and wanted us to understand that our departure was being monitored and anticipated. We abandoned our research immediately and signaled for emergency extraction using the helicopter communication beacon. When the pilot arrived to collect us, we offered no explanation for our early departure or Michael's disappearance. The official report classified him as missing due to a wilderness accident, and no additional search operations were authorized due to the extreme remoteness of the study area. I have never returned to field research since, and I have never published any of the findings from our aborted study. The footage and documentation we collected remain sealed in my personal files, and I have absolutely no intention of sharing them with the scientific community. Some discoveries, you see, challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence and consciousness in ways that the academic world simply isn't prepared to accept. Michael Chen was never found, and his disappearance remains officially unexplained. But I know what happened to him, just as I know precisely why our research was terminated by entities that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what we consider possible in non-human species. The structures we documented in that remote forest were not created by bears. They were constructed by something that uses bear forms as camouflage while engaging in activities that serve purposes we cannot even begin to comprehend. Our research was ended not by equipment failure or logistical challenges, but by the direct intervention of intelligences that refuse to allow their activities to be documented or understood by human science. I continue to work as a wildlife biologist, but only in laboratory settings and only with species whose behavior conforms to established scientific principles. I have learned with a profound and heavy heart that some aspects of the natural world are protected by forces that will not tolerate investigation, and some forms of intelligence are simply too alien for human understanding. The mountains keep their secrets, and some of those secrets are truly better left undiscovered by curious scientists who mistake their education for wisdom and their technology for understanding. Michael learned that lesson too late. I was fortunate enough to escape before the same terrifying lesson was taught to our entire research team. The experience left an indelible mark, not just on my career, but on my entire perception of reality. It's a haunting reminder of the vast unknowns that still lurk in the untouched corners of our world, forces that operate outside our conventional scientific paradigms. We approach nature with our instruments and theories, believing we can categorize and comprehend, But sometimes, nature holds secrets so profound they shatter our very definitions of life and intelligence. The hubris of human inquiry, the assumption that every mystery can be solved, every behavior explained, was utterly stripped away in that silent, observing forest. I often wonder what those entities were truly building, what grand purpose lay behind their intricate constructions and deliberate subterfuge. Were they simply asserting their territory, sending a stark warning, or was something far more complex at play? The thought that an ancient hidden intelligence coexists with us, silently observing our clumsy attempts to understand their world, is a disquieting truth I now carry. It forces a humility that few scientists ever truly embrace, a chilling acceptance of the limits of our own understanding. 3 years ago, I filed an incident report that still haunts my sleep. A cold official document now gathering dust in a Parks Canada office in Halifax. It's a sterile bureaucratic shell, stripped bare of any detail that might hint at the true terror, or make anyone question my sanity or professional competence. But the real story, the one that lives in the shadows of my memory, has remained confined to my family until now. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've served as a park ranger in the Maritime Provinces for over 15 years. I thought I'd seen it all. The lost tourists, the thrilling bear encounters, the clandestine hunting operations, and countless search and rescue missions through terrain that would break most people. I was wrong. Everything changed when I was assigned to a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail system, winding its way through the dense, unforgiving wilderness of northern New Brunswick. The incident began innocently enough. On a Tuesday morning in late September, with a call from dispatch about 2 overdue hikers, Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, both seasoned backpackers from Toronto, had planned a 5-day trek through the Colonia Highlands. They were supposed to check in at the ranger station on Monday evening, but never arrived. Jennifer's sister, their emergency contact, hadn't heard from them since a text message on Saturday, a quick note about making good time before going off-grid. Standard procedure for overdue hikers is a tiered response. First, check their vehicle at the trailhead, then contact local accommodations and other ranger stations. If those avenues yield nothing, we launch a formal search. Jennifer and David's silver Honda CR-V was indeed still parked at the Pine Creek trailhead, exactly where they'd left it 4 days prior. Their gear appeared untouched, with no signs of tampering. I began my search at first light on Wednesday, following the main trail they had indicated on their plan. The Pine Creek Trail is a moderately challenging route, twisting through ancient forests for about 12 kilometers before branching into smaller paths that delve deeper into the wild. The terrain is rugged but generally well marked. Experienced hikers like Jennifer and David should have navigated it without issue, even in less than ideal weather. The first unsettling discovery came about 6 kilometers in, near a creek crossing known to trail guides as Dead Man's Ford. The wooden bridge, usually spanning the water, had been damaged by a recent storm, forcing hikers to find an alternate route. I could see where someone had explored options along the bank, and there, clear in the mud, were boot prints matching the size and tread of hiking boots. 2 distinct sets, one smaller than the other, consistent with Jennifer and David, but mixed with their tracks was something else. Something that compelled me to stop, my blood running cold. These were tracks I had never witnessed in 15 years of wilderness work. Roughly humanoid in shape, yet impossibly elongated, almost twice the length of a normal human foot. The impressions clearly showed what looked like 4 toes, each terminating in a sharp point that had gouged deep into the soft earth. The spacing and gait suggested a bipedal creature, but the stride length was utterly impossible, nearly 2 meters between steps. I documented the tracks with my camera and GPS, though I knew photographs could never truly capture the profound, unsettling quality of seeing them firsthand. The depth and clarity of the impressions indicated something significantly heavier than a human, yet the prints showed none of the clumsy, shuffling gait one might expect from a large animal moving upright. These were deliberate, purposeful steps, following the exact path the hikers had taken across the creek. Following the trail on the opposite bank, I found more conventional evidence of Jennifer and David's passage, a protein bar wrapper wedged between rocks, clearly recent. A small piece of dark blue fabric matching David's hiking jacket caught on a low branch. But the strange tracks persisted, sometimes paralleling the human trail, sometimes crossing it, always maintaining that impossible stride. Approximately 2 kilometers past Deadman's Ford, the official trail branched into 3 smaller paths. Their filed plan indicated they should have taken the northwest route towards the Colonia Peaks. But the tracks I was following, both human and otherwise, led decisively towards the eastern branch. The eastern trail is not for the faint of heart, or even the casual hiker. It plunges into some of the most remote wilderness in the province, through terrain that has remained largely untouched for millennia. The forest here is ancient and dense, with massive pine and oak trees blocking most of the sunlight, even at midday. The undergrowth is thick with ferns and fallen logs, creating a labyrinth of shadows and hidden obstacles that can disorient even the most seasoned woodsman. I followed the tracks for another hour, growing increasingly apprehensive about what I might discover. The human footprints were becoming less distinct, as if Jennifer and David were moving more quickly, or perhaps less carefully than before. In stark contrast, the strange tracks seemed to grow clearer and more numerous. At several points, it appeared as though multiple sets of the elongated prints converged on the trail from different directions, a chilling implication. My chainsaw coughed its last, dying mid-cut, a chilling silence that, looking back, should have been our first, undeniable warning. I'm Billy McLeod, and I've spent nearly 20 years carving a living out of the ancient Appalachian Mountains. This trade, this deep connection to the forest, runs in my blood. My grandfather, a man who stepped off a boat from the Scottish Highlands in 1962 with little more than his axe and an iron will, taught my father everything he knew. My father, in turn, taught me. For 3 generations, the McLeods have worked these woods, convinced we knew every hidden ridge, every echoing hollow, every magnificent stand of old-growth timber stretching from Virginia all the way to Pennsylvania. We believed we were part of it, masters of it. We were terribly, dangerously wrong. The job itself arrived through a familiar contact at Pinnacle Lumber, a contract to clear a tract of private land nestled deep in the remote reaches of eastern Kentucky. The property owner, some faceless development company out of Louisville, planned to harvest the mature hardwood before breaking ground on what they envisioned as a luxury retreat. The money was more than decent, enough to keep our small crew working steadily through the harsh winter months when most logging operations usually grind to a halt. The land itself was a sight to behold, imbued with that raw, untamed majesty only true wilderness possesses. Rolling hills draped in a verdant tapestry of ancient oak and towering maple, trees that had been silently growing since before the drums of the Civil War first sounded. Some of the giants we were tasked with felling were truly immense. Their trunks so wide they demand our biggest equipment and the most meticulous planning just to bring them down safely. The access road was little more than a rough track, barely wide enough for our trucks, but we'd certainly navigated worse. Our crew was a tight-knit unit of 4. There was me, of course, Tommy Rodriguez from West Virginia, our skidder operator, a wizard behind the controls who could coax heavy machinery through terrain that would humble a mountain goat. Dale Morrison, our feller, whose father had taught him to drop trees with surgical precision, guiding their fall with an almost supernatural intuition. And then Jake Patterson, barely 22, but with an innate feel for the woods and the instincts of a seasoned logger already coursing through his veins. We'd worked together for 3 years, operating with the seamless efficiency that only complete, unspoken trust can forge. The first week unfolded precisely as it should have. We established our staging area close to the access road and began systematically processing the marked trees. The timber was exquisite, mostly prime red oak and sugar maple, interspersed with valuable ash and cherry. The weather held, our equipment hummed along without a hitch, and by Friday afternoon, we'd already cleared nearly 30% of the contracted timber, well ahead of schedule. It was during the second week that a creeping unease began to settle over us. The shift was subtle at first, the kind of atmospheric tremor that experienced woodsmen learn to instinctively sense but find impossible to put into words. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, an unnerving, unnatural quiet descending. The lively chirping of birds, so prevalent during our first week, vanished, replaced by an eerie scarcity. Even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush faded into a profound silence, making the roar of our equipment seem grotesquely loud, an intrusion. Dale was the first to vocalize it during our Monday lunch break. He'd been working a stretch of ridgeline a couple hundred meters from the rest of us when his chainsaw began acting up, sputtering, losing power, running rough despite having been meticulously serviced just days prior. Tommy went to investigate, finding no mechanical fault with the saw, yet it continued to perform erratically only in that specific spot. More unsettling still was Jake's discovery that afternoon. While delimbing a massive oak, he found strange markings carved deep into the trunk, about 6 feet up from the base. The cuts were deliberate, precise, forming symbols none of us had ever seen. These weren't axe marks, not natural damage, and certainly not part of any logging operation. Someone, or something, had taken considerable time and effort to etch these designs into the living wood. The symbols were geometric, yet they possessed an unsettling organic flow. Angular lines that twisted and curved in a way that made them almost painful to look at directly. Jake counted 7 distinct markings, arranged in a rough circle around the tree's circumference. When he tried to snap a photo with his phone, the camera glitched, producing images so blurred and distorted they were beyond recognition. By Wednesday of that second week, our equipment troubles had spiraled from mere annoyances into genuine safety hazards. Chainsaws that had purred flawlessly moments before would suddenly choke, dying or refusing to start entirely whenever we attempted to work in certain localized areas. The hydraulic systems on our skidder began suffering inexplicable pressure drops that baffled even our most seasoned mechanic. But perhaps the most unnerving was our diesel generator, which hummed reliably throughout the daylight hours, only to sputter and die without fail the moment we tried to run it after dusk. It was that same Wednesday when Dale stumbled upon a discovery that truly reoriented our understanding of the place. While scouting new timber in an untouched section, he found undeniable evidence of previous logging activity. Dozens of cut stumps, some clearly decades old, dotted an area that our survey maps explicitly indicated had never been harvested. The cuts were clean, professional, the unmistakable work of skilled loggers with top-tier equipment. Yet there were no access roads leading to this remote spot, no telltale skid trails where logs would have been dragged out, no tire tracks or equipment marks suggesting how any machinery had ever reached, let alone departed, such an inaccessible place. Most perplexing of all was the arrangement of the stumps themselves. They formed patterns, not random clusters, patterns that served absolutely no logical logging purpose, yet were too deliberate, too geometrically precise, to be dismissed as mere coincidence. Thursday morning brought another chilling find. Tommy discovered the first piece of truly abandoned equipment, an old chainsaw, judging by its model, likely 20 years past its prime. It lay wedged between 2 rocks by a small creek, about half a kilometer from our active work site. What struck us instantly was its condition, remarkably preserved despite its apparent long exposure to the elements. The chain was still keen, the fuel tank dry but miraculously free of rust or corrosion, and when Tommy tentatively pulled the starter cord, the engine turned over with an unsettling freedom, but it was the branding that truly curdled our blood. The saw bore the faded logo of Morrison Logging, a company that had folded clear back in 1987. Tommy, who'd started young, recognized the distinctive color scheme. A quick check of the serial number confirmed our growing dread. It matched records for equipment reported lost during a logging operation in these very mountains over 15 years ago. The Morrison crew we knew had simply vanished without a trace. When I inherited my great-uncle's cabin, the lawyer handed me the deed and a sealed letter. His only instruction, delivered with a curious glint in his eye, was simple. Read this after your first night alone on the property. My name is James Whitfield, and just 2 years ago, my life was a world away. A successful software engineer thriving in London, utterly disconnected from my American family heritage. My knowledge of great-uncle Silas was minimal, limited to whispered mentions at family gatherings and a vague understanding that he'd lived as something of a hermit in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Tennessee for over 4 decades. The inheritance, frankly, was a complete shock. I'd never met Silas, nor did I imagine he even knew of my existence. According to Mr. Cornelius Thorne, the estate attorney from Knoxville, Silas's will was oddly specific, stipulating that his property should pass to the eldest male descendant of the Whitfield line currently residing outside the mountain region. This archaic language, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, made me the sole heir to 200 acres of remote mountain land and whatever structures lay upon it. Mr. Thorne's initial description of my newfound estate was deliberately vague. He spoke of a cabin, some outbuildings, and mineral and timber rights that might hold modest commercial value. When I pressed for more details about the property's exact location or its condition, he deftly sidestepped my questions with legal jargon, merely suggesting I inspect it personally before making any decisions. The sealed letter he gave me was beautiful, too elegant perhaps for a mountain recluse. Cream-colored, heavy, expensive paper, my name penned across it in a refined script. The envelope was sealed with dark red wax, bearing an impression of an unfamiliar symbol, a tree with roots that seemed to stretch in impossible directions. Mr. Thorne had emphasized Silas's strict instructions about when the letter should be opened, making me promise to honor this final request. My initial plan was straightforward: a long weekend visit to assess the property's condition and potential value, then decide whether to sell it immediately or invest in renovations. I arranged time off from my London position, booked a flight to Knoxville, fully expecting to be back home within a week, with a clear understanding of my new assets. The drive from Knoxville to the property was a journey into another world, nearly 3 hours through increasingly remote mountain roads that felt utterly abandoned by modern infrastructure. The final 10 kilometers were a challenge. A gravel track winding through dense forest and over ridges where cell service and GPS were non-existent. By the time I reached what I assumed was the property boundary, I was entirely reliant on the hand-drawn map Mr. Thorne had provided. The cabin itself was far grander and more substantial than the attorney's understated description had suggested. It was a 2-story log structure built on a sturdy stone foundation, with a wide, covered porch that faced west, offering a breathtaking, layered view of mountain ridges stretching to the horizon. The craftsmanship was undeniable, the work of someone with considerable skill and a keen eye for detail. Perfectly fitted logs, stonework that had defied decades of harsh mountain weather. Yet certain aspects of its design struck me as unusual, even unsettling. The windows were notably smaller than one might expect for a building of this size, many fitted with heavy wooden shutters that could be secured from within by iron bars. The main entrance was a massive oak door, reinforced with metal bands and equipped with multiple locks of varying ages and styles, as if security had been incrementally enhanced over many years. The interior proved even more surprising. Silas had lived simply but comfortably, surrounded by handcrafted furniture, extensive bookshelves, and a large stone fireplace that dominated the main living area. The cabin was wired for electricity and plumbed for running water, though both systems seemed to draw from independent generators and wells, not municipal services. Most intriguing was Silas's library, which consumed nearly the entire second floor. It housed hundreds of books on an eclectic range of subjects: Appalachian history and folklore, geology, botany, anthropology. Many volumes were old, some appearing quite valuable. First editions and academic texts that painted a picture of a great-uncle far more educated and sophisticated than his mountain hermit reputation would suggest. As evening descended on my first day, I prepared for what I anticipated would be a peaceful night in the mountains, followed by a thorough property inventory the next morning. I had brought basic supplies from Knoxville and was genuinely looking forward to the solitude and natural beauty my urban life rarely afforded. It was only after darkness had completely enveloped the cabin that I began to grasp why Silas had lived behind reinforced doors and barred windows. The sounds began around 10 p.m., subtle at first, then gradually becoming more distinct, more purposeful, from somewhere in the dense forest surrounding the cabin. I detected what seemed to be coordinated movement, multiple entities pushing through the underbrush in patterns that suggested intelligence, not random wildlife. The sounds were too regular, too organized to be natural, yet too systematic to be human. I initially dismissed them as my imagination, amplified by my unfamiliarity with mountain wilderness. City dwellers often struggle to interpret the normal nocturnal sounds of a forest, and I assumed my urban sensibilities were conjuring threats where none existed. But as the evening wore on, the sounds grew closer, more obviously deliberate. By midnight, I could clearly distinguish what felt like multiple individuals circling the cabin at a consistent distance, maintaining formation as they moved through terrain that should have made such coordinated movement extremely difficult. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like communication between these entities. Low vocalizations, almost like human speech, but in a language I couldn't identify. Most disturbing was the dawning realization that whatever was moving through the forest was specifically focused on the cabin. The sounds lacked the random quality of animals following natural paths or foraging for food. Instead, they suggested systematic reconnaissance, as if these entities were studying the structure, assessing its defenses. I spent most of that first night seated in the living room, all shutters closed and locked, listening to the sounds outside, desperately trying to convince myself I was overreacting to normal wilderness conditions. But as dawn approached and the sounds gradually faded, I found myself checking and rechecking the multiple locks on the main door, examining the iron bars on the windows with a terrifying new appreciation for their necessity. The sealed letter lay on the kitchen table where I had left it the previous evening, and Silas's specific instructions about when it should be opened suddenly seemed far more significant than when Mr. Thorne had first handed it to me in his Knoxville office. The contents of that letter challenged everything I thought I understood about my family history, about my inheritance, and about the very nature of reality itself. "James," it began in that elegant script, "if you're reading this, then you have survived your first night on Whitfield land and experienced what our family has guarded against for over 2 centuries. The property you have inherited is not simply a cabin and forest acreage. It is a responsibility that has been passed down through our bloodline since your ancestor, Ezekiel Whitfield, first settled in these mountains in 1823. Ezekiel did not choose this location for its beauty or natural resources. He came here because something had to be contained, something that the Cherokee tribes had once managed through rituals and knowledge that died with their forced removal from these lands. When the government relocated the Cherokee in 1838, they left behind warnings about places that should not be disturbed and entities that required constant vigilance to prevent them from spreading beyond their ancient boundaries. Your great-great-grandfather understood these warnings too late. By the time he realized what he had awakened through his clearing and construction activities, the damage was done. The things that live in the deep places of these mountains had been given access to the surface world, and they began to affect everything within miles of their emergence points. The Whitfield family has spent 6 generations learning how to contain this threat. The cabin was not built as a home. It was constructed as a guardhouse, positioned to monitor and control access to the areas where these entities maintain their strongest presence. Every improvement to the structure, every security measure you have observed, represents knowledge gained through encounters that claim the lives of your relatives. The sounds you heard last night were a test. They come every few months to assess the defenses and determine whether the guardian is still present and capable. If the cabin remains empty for too long, they will begin to expand their territory. If the current guardian shows weakness or abandons his responsibilities, they will follow him wherever he goes. You now have a choice that every Whitfield male has faced for 7 generations. You can accept the responsibility of maintaining the containment that your family has established, learning the rituals and precautions that will keep these entities confined to their deep places. Or you can abandon the property and return to your life in London, knowing that whatever follows you home will be your fault and your burden to bear. If you choose to stay, examine the basement of the cabin. You will find documents that explain everything your family has learned about what lies beneath these mountains and how to coexist with forces that should not exist in our world. If you choose to leave, burn this letter and never speak of what you have inherited to anyone who might be curious enough to investigate. But know this, the Whitfield bloodline carries a responsibility that cannot be escaped through distance or denial. What your ancestor awakened in 1823 remains active, and it remembers the family that disturbed its ancient sleep. Whether you stay or go, you are now connected to this place and these entities in ways that will affect the rest of your life. Choose wisely. The consequences of your decision will extend far beyond your own survival. Your great-uncle, Silas Whitfield. I spent the rest of that morning exploring the basement Silas had mentioned in his letter. Hidden behind a false wall, I found a century's worth of documentation detailing encounters, containment procedures, and the chilling, gradual understanding my family had developed about the entities inhabiting the deepest parts of the mountain. The records were meticulous and utterly terrifying. Generation after generation of Whitfields had documented their experiences with creatures that defied classification and behaviors that violated every assumption about natural law. The basement contained maps showing the locations of emergence points, calendars marking periods of increased activity, and detailed instructions for rituals that had proven effective in maintaining the containment that kept these entities confined to their underground domains. Most significantly, I found evidence that other families in remote mountain regions throughout Appalachia were dealing with similar situations. The Whitfields were not unique. They were part of a hidden network of bloodlines that had inherited the solemn responsibility for maintaining barriers between our world and something that existed in the spaces beneath civilized understanding. 2 years later, I remain at the cabin. I resigned from my position in London, exchanging my software engineering career for a far more ancient, far more terrifying calling. I have learned to live according to the schedules and precautions my family developed through 2 centuries of trial and error. The sounds in the forest have become familiar, a grim part of my nightly routine, and I have developed the skills necessary to respond appropriately when the entities test the boundaries of their containment. I have also begun the arduous process of preparing for the eventual transfer of responsibility to the next generation, should one prove capable. The Whitfield line will continue, and the burden of guardianship will pass to whoever is deemed worthy of maintaining the vigilance that protects not just our family, but everyone who lives within range of what sleeps beneath these ancient mountains. Some inheritances, I have learned, come with obligations that extend far beyond mere property ownership. I am no longer James Whitfield, the software engineer. I am James Whitfield, the guardian, and I will hold this position until the mountain claims me, or I find someone worthy to take my place. The choice, as Silas so starkly warned, was never truly mine to make. Some responsibilities choose their bearers, and some family legacies cannot be escaped through distance or denial. What lies beneath Whitfield land remembers everything, and it is patient enough to wait for whatever comes next. The profound isolation, the constant vigilance against an unseen yet palpable threat, has irrevocably altered me. The quiet moments are punctuated by a deep, almost primal awareness of the forces at play, a stark contrast to the sterile certainty of code and algorithms I once navigated. I often wonder about the future, about the psychological toll this duty has taken on generations of Whitfields, and whether I can truly prepare another for a life defined by such a terrifying, all-consuming burden. This isn't just about protecting land. It's about safeguarding humanity from something that defies comprehension. A legacy steeped in fear and sacrifice that will forever be etched into my soul. My family, the Bradfords, have been rooted deep in these Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia for 5 long generations. There's a sacred rule we've lived by, a vow etched into our very bones that had never been broken. Not until last winter, when fate, cruel and unyielding, forced my hand. I'm Tommy Bradford, and I'm quite possibly the last of my bloodline who will ever call these ancient hills home. Our story here began way back in 1847, when my great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah, first cleared a patch of land in what we now call Devil's Backbone Hollow. For over a century and a half, 5 generations of us have lived, loved, toiled, and eventually died within a mere stone's throw of that original homestead. And through all those years, we've learned one undeniable, chilling truth. There are places in these mountains where decent folk simply do not go. Every mountain family holds such unspoken rules, passed down like heirlooms, warnings about forbidden paths, times when it's wiser to bolt the doors and stay inside. Outsiders, of course, scoff at these, dismissing them as mere superstition, quaint folklore from a bygone era that has no place in our modern world. But families like mine, we know better. We understand that some traditions aren't just quaint stories. They exist for reasons that only truly reveal themselves when you're foolish enough to disregard them. Our Bradford family rule was stark, simple, and utterly absolute. Never, under any circumstances, enter Bone Valley after dark, and never ever step foot in Bone Valley alone, no matter the time of day. This stricture had been upheld without a single exception since Jeremiah's time. The dire consequences of violating it had been demonstrated often enough through the years that no Bradford ever dared to question its absolute necessity. Bone Valley itself is a stark, narrow ravine, a jagged gash slicing deep into the mountains, about 8 miles northeast of our family land. From high above, it looks deceptively ordinary. Just another natural drainage, thickly forested and notoriously difficult to access. But step inside, and you'd find a floor unlike anything else in our region. It earns its grim name from the staggering accumulation of animal bones that litter its depths. Deer, bear, wild boar, and even creatures I couldn't begin to identify. Their remains have been collecting there for as long as anyone can remember. What's truly unsettling is that these bones aren't scattered haphazardly, as you'd expect from natural deaths or predators. No, they're arranged in deliberate, intricate patterns, suggesting an intentional placement by some organizing intelligence, something far beyond the natural order. My grandfather, Samuel Bradford, was the last family member to ever set foot in Bone Valley before my own desperate transgression. It was 1962, and he was just a young man. He'd tracked a wounded bear into the ravine, only to be trapped there overnight by an unexpected early snowstorm. Whatever he endured during those terrifying hours fundamentally altered him. The confident mountain man I knew transformed into someone who refused to discuss certain topics, who never again hunted alone. Samuel would only ever murmur that the bone arrangements in that valley served a purpose, one that living creatures were simply not meant to comprehend. He claimed these patterns created pathways for things that should not exist in our world, and that a human presence in the valley after dark allowed these entities to follow visitors right back to our settled mountain homes. The chilling stories about Bone Valley echo through every generation of Bradfords. My great-grandfather often spoke of hearing his name whispered from the valley on still winter nights, carried on a wind that wasn't there. My father recalled our livestock mysteriously vanishing whenever anyone got too close to the valley's entrance, as if mere proximity triggered a predatory hunger in things that usually avoided domestic animals. But it was my younger sister, Emma, who truly provided the most compelling, heartbreaking evidence that our family's warnings weren't just inherited superstition, but based on genuine, terrifying threats. Emma Bradford was born with what mountain families call the sight, an uncanny ability to perceive aspects of the natural world hidden from most. She could predict weather days in advance, find lost livestock by following traces only she could see, and sense dangerous wildlife long before any conventional tracker. When Emma was just 12, she began having dreams about Bone Valley, dreams so vivid, so disturbingly specific, they couldn't possibly be mere products of imagination. She described the exact arrangements of bones, the peculiar, almost unnatural quality of light filtering through the dense canopy, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by entities just beyond the edge of visibility. Most unsettling were her claims that something in the valley was calling to her, promising to unlock knowledge about the natural world, to expand her abilities far beyond their current limits. The voice in her dreams spoke with an ancient authority, hinting at the connection between life and death, at cycles of existence far grander than human understanding, and at the unique role certain individuals could play in bridging different forms of consciousness. Emma pleaded with our parents, begging them to let her visit Bone Valley, convinced her dreams were divine guidance, a message that could benefit our entire family. She insisted the entity calling to her wasn't malevolent, but simply seeking to communicate with someone sensitive enough to truly understand. Our parents, however, refused absolutely, reinforcing the family rule with punishments that underscored just how gravely they viewed the threat. Yet Emma's dreams persisted throughout her teenage years, growing more vivid, more compelling as she matured. By the time she turned 18, she was spending entire nights awake, terrified to sleep because of the sheer intensity of her dream experiences. Emma Bradford vanished on her 19th birthday in November of 1998. She left no note, took no belongings, and offered no hint of her intentions to anyone. But deep down, we all knew exactly where she had gone, just as we knew that our decades of warnings had been tragically insufficient to overcome whatever had been calling to her from Bone Valley. The search for Emma dragged on for 3 grueling weeks, involving every able-bodied man in our community. We systematically combed the mountains, followed every trail, checked every possible shelter, but we never ever entered Bone Valley itself, and Emma was never found. For 25 long haunted years, I honored that family rule, the very one that had so tragically failed to protect my sister. I avoided Bone Valley completely, rerouting hiking trails that strayed too close to its eerie entrance, and painstakingly taught my own children to respect the boundaries established by 5 generations of Bradford experience. But then last winter, life threw me a truly impossible choice: uphold a family tradition or respond to a crisis that threatened someone I could never, ever abandon. My 8-year-old grandson, Jacob, Emma's nephew, was staying with me for the weekend while his parents were away at a wedding. He too has inherited some measure of Emma's unsettling sensitivity to the hidden aspects of the natural world. Jacob frequently knows things he shouldn't, exhibiting an awareness of environmental changes that far exceeds normal childhood intuition. On a cold Saturday afternoon, Jacob suddenly announced with absolute, unwavering certainty that he needed to go to Bone Valley. Someone, he said, was trapped and calling for help. His description of the situation was too precise, too detailed, to dismiss as mere childhood fantasy. According to Jacob, "My family, the Bradfords, have been rooted deep in these Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia for 5 long generations. There's a sacred rule we've lived by, a vow etched into our very bones that had never been broken. Not until last winter, when fate, cruel and unyielding, forced my hand. I'm Tommy Bradford, and I'm quite possibly the last of my bloodline who will ever call these ancient hills home." Our story here began way back in 1847, when my great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah, first cleared a patch of land in what we now call Devil's Backbone Hollow. For over a century and a half, 5 generations of us have lived, loved, toiled, and eventually died within a mere stone's throw of that original homestead. And through all those years, we've learned one undeniable, chilling truth. There are places in these mountains where decent folk simply do not go. Every mountain family holds such unspoken rules, passed down like heirlooms, warnings about forbidden paths, times when it's wiser to bolt the doors and stay inside. Outsiders, of course, scoff at these, dismissing them as mere superstition, quaint folklore from a bygone era that has no place in our modern world. But families like mine, we know better. We understand that some traditions aren't just quaint stories. They exist for reasons that only truly reveal themselves when you're foolish enough to disregard them. Our Bradford family rule was stark, simple, and utterly absolute. Never, under any circumstances, enter Bone Valley after dark, and never ever step foot in Bone Valley alone, no matter the time of day. This stricture had been upheld without a single exception since Jeremiah's time. The dire consequences of violating it had been demonstrated often enough through the years that no Bradford ever dared to question its absolute necessity. Bone Valley itself is a stark, narrow ravine, a jagged gash slicing deep into the mountains, about 8 miles northeast of our family land. From high above, it looks deceptively ordinary. Just another natural drainage, thickly forested and notoriously difficult to access. But step inside, and you'd find a floor unlike anything else in our region. It earns its grim name from the staggering accumulation of animal bones that litter its depths. Deer, bear, wild boar, and even creatures I couldn't begin to identify. Their remains have been collecting there for as long as anyone can remember. What's truly unsettling is that these bones aren't scattered haphazardly, as you'd expect from natural deaths or predators. No, they're arranged in deliberate, intricate patterns, suggesting an intentional placement by some organizing intelligence, something far beyond the natural order. My grandfather, Samuel Bradford, was the last family member to ever set foot in Bone Valley before my own desperate transgression. It was 1962, and he was just a young man. He'd tracked a wounded bear into the ravine, only to be trapped there overnight by an unexpected early snowstorm. Whatever he endured during those terrifying hours fundamentally altered him. The confident mountain man I knew transformed into someone who refused to discuss certain topics, who never again hunted alone. Samuel would only ever murmur that the bone arrangements in that valley served a purpose, one that living creatures were simply not meant to comprehend. He claimed these patterns created pathways for things that should not exist in our world, and that a human presence in the valley after dark allowed these entities to follow visitors right back to our settled mountain homes. The chilling stories about Bone Valley echo through every generation of Bradfords. My great-grandfather often spoke of hearing his name whispered from the valley on still winter nights, carried on a wind that wasn't there. My father recalled our livestock mysteriously vanishing whenever anyone got too close to the valley's entrance, as if mere proximity triggered a predatory hunger in things that usually avoided domestic animals. But it was my younger sister, Emma, who truly provided the most compelling, heartbreaking evidence that our family's warnings weren't just inherited superstition, but based on genuine, terrifying threats. Emma Bradford was born with what mountain families call the sight, an uncanny ability to perceive aspects of the natural world hidden from most. She could predict weather days in advance, find lost livestock by following traces only she could see, and sense dangerous wildlife long before any conventional tracker. When Emma was just 12, she began having dreams about Bone Valley. Dreams so vivid, so disturbingly specific, they couldn't possibly be mere products of imagination. She described the exact arrangements of bones, the peculiar, almost unnatural quality of light filtering through the dense canopy, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched by entities just beyond the edge of visibility. Most unsettling were her claims that something in the valley was calling to her, promising to unlock knowledge about the natural world, to expand her abilities far beyond their current limits. The voice in her dreams spoke with an ancient authority, hinting at the connection between life and death, at cycles of existence far grander than human understanding, and at the unique role certain individuals could play in bridging different forms of consciousness. Emma pleaded with our parents, begging them to let her visit Bone Valley, convinced her dreams were divine guidance, a message that could benefit our entire family. She insisted the entity calling to her wasn't malevolent, but simply seeking to communicate with someone sensitive enough to truly understand. Our parents, however, refused absolutely, reinforcing the family rule with punishments that underscored just how gravely they viewed the threat. Yet Emma's dreams persisted throughout her teenage years, growing more vivid, more compelling as she matured. By the time she turned 18, she was spending entire nights awake, terrified to sleep because of the sheer intensity of her dream experiences. Emma Bradford vanished on her 19th birthday in November of 1998. She left no note, took no belongings, and offered no hint of her intentions to anyone. But deep down, we all knew exactly where she had gone, just as we knew that our decades of warnings had been tragically insufficient to overcome whatever had been calling to her from Bone Valley. The search for Emma dragged on for 3 grueling weeks, involving every able-bodied man in our community. We systematically combed the mountains, followed every trail, checked every possible shelter, but we never ever entered Bone Valley itself, and Emma was never found. For 25 long haunted years, I honored that family rule, the very one that had so tragically failed to protect my sister. I avoided Bone Valley completely, rerouting hiking trails that strayed too close to its eerie entrance, and painstakingly taught my own children to respect the boundaries established by 5 generations of Bradford experience. But then last winter, life threw me a truly impossible choice: uphold a family tradition or respond to a crisis that threatened someone I could never, ever abandon. My 8-year-old grandson, Jacob, Emma's nephew, was staying with me for the weekend while his parents were away at a wedding. He, too, has inherited some measure of Emma's unsettling sensitivity to the hidden aspects of the natural world. Jacob frequently knows things he shouldn't, exhibiting an awareness of environmental changes that far exceeds normal childhood intuition. On a cold Saturday afternoon, Jacob suddenly announced with absolute, unwavering certainty that he needed to go to Bone Valley. Someone, he said, was trapped and calling for help. His description of the situation was too precise, too detailed, to dismiss as mere childhood fantasy. According to Jacob, "In my 15 years dedicated to search and rescue, I've seen things that could strip the joy from any hike, turn tranquil forests into places of dread. But the Kellerman case, that one didn't just challenge us, it fundamentally shattered our entire team. My name is Detective Sarah O'Connor, and I lead the Specialized Wilderness Search and Rescue Unit for the Virginia State Police, covering the sprawling, often unforgiving Blue Ridge Mountains. Our work is vast, ranging from finding lost hikers and responding to climbing accidents to investigating missing persons in some of the East Coast's most remote and challenging terrain. We've honed our protocols and procedures over the years, learning to operate effectively in conditions that would overwhelm most law enforcement units. Yet, what we stumbled upon during the Kellerman investigation in October 2019 forced us to question everything we thought we knew about wilderness operations, pushing us to confront possibilities our training had never, could never, prepare us for. The initial call reached us on a quiet Thursday evening, forwarded from the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Department. 3 experienced hikers from Northern Virginia had been reported overdue by their worried family. They'd failed to check in after what should have been a routine weekend backpacking trip. The missing family were Dr. Michael Kellerman, a 45-year-old physician from Alexandria, his wife Jennifer, a 41-year-old high school teacher, and their 16-year-old son David, an Eagle Scout with extensive wilderness experience. The Kellermans were meticulous planners, having charted a 3-day trek through a well-known section of the George Washington National Forest. This area, while known for its challenging terrain, also boasted a well-established and popular trail system. Their intended route was a 25-kilometer loop, including several scenic overlooks and backcountry camping areas favored by seasoned hikers. They'd even filed a detailed itinerary with park rangers, carrying all the right gear: GPS devices, emergency beacons, and satellite communication equipment. When Sunday evening came and went without their return home, Jennifer's sister immediately contacted local authorities. This was utterly out of character for the Kellermans. They never deviated from their plans without good reason, and their silence was a blaring alarm. By Monday morning, we had launched a full-scale search operation, mobilizing over 40 personnel from multiple agencies. Our initial sweep of their planned route confirmed their vehicle was precisely where it should be, at the designated trailhead. It was locked, undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry or vandalism. A quick look inside revealed they had packed, appropriately for their trek, with ample food, water, and emergency supplies for a party of 3 hiking in mild autumn weather. The first day of searching gave us some reassurance that the Kellermans had, at least, started their journey as planned. We found clear boot prints matching their shoe sizes near several trail markers, and witnesses at a popular overlook remembered seeing a family fitting their description on Saturday morning. These accounts painted a picture of the Kellermans in good spirits, making normal progress along their intended route. But then, somewhere between that overlook and their planned first night camping area, they simply vanished. The terrain itself was familiar to our team: rolling, forested hills, crisscrossed by well-maintained trails, clearly marked and regularly patrolled by park rangers. The weather that weekend had been perfect for hiking: clear skies, comfortable temperatures. There were no unusual natural hazards that might have forced them to change their route or seek emergency shelter. By the third day of searching, we had meticulously covered every established trail in the area, utilizing both ground teams and helicopter surveillance. We deployed K9 units, consulted with local guides who knew every unmarked path like the back of their hand, and interviewed dozens of other hikers who had been in the area that same weekend. Despite our exhaustive efforts, we found no additional trace of the Kellerman family beyond their confirmed presence at the overlook on Saturday morning. It was as if they'd been plucked from the earth. The first real breakthrough came on Thursday morning when one of our K9 teams picked up a faint, intermittent scent trail. It led away from the established path system, deep into an area of dense forest not typically accessible to hikers. It was our first concrete lead since the operation began. Following this trail demanded technical climbing equipment and experienced mountaineers, as it wound through terrain far more challenging than anything the Kellermans would have voluntarily attempted. The path plunged into a steep ravine, choked with loose rock and fallen timber, then clawed its way up the opposite side through vegetation so thick that visibility was often limited to mere meters. After 4 grueling hours, our tracking team finally reached a small clearing, roughly 3 kilometers from the nearest established trail. The site bore the hallmarks of a temporary campsite: a fire ring, cleared areas where tents had been erected. But the condition of the campsite itself immediately raised unsettling questions about what had truly transpired there. The fire ring contained the remains of a blaze that had burned far hotter and longer than any normal camping fire. The ashes held partially burned fragments of fabric that appeared to match clothing descriptions provided by the Kellerman family. Even more disturbing was the discovery of personal items scattered throughout the clearing, not neatly placed, but in a chaotic pattern suggesting they had been thrown or dropped in a hurry. We found Dr. Kellerman's wallet, its contents surprisingly intact, but the leather was scorched as if exposed to intense heat. Jennifer's hiking boots lay at opposite edges of the clearing, both showing signs of damage that couldn't be explained by normal wear or wilderness conditions. Most significantly, David's backpack was hanging from a tree branch approximately 4 meters above the ground, far too high to have been placed there by any normal human means. The scent trail that had led us to this clearing continued beyond, but its character had changed dramatically. Our K9 handlers reported their dogs displaying extreme agitation, refusing to follow the trail any further into the forest. These were experienced search dogs, veterans of hundreds of cases in challenging conditions, and their handlers had never witnessed such obvious fear and reluctance. When we cautiously attempted to continue tracking without the dogs, we made discoveries that compelled us to request additional resources and expertise. far beyond our normal search and rescue capabilities. The trail led us into a series of natural rock formations, a perplexing maze of narrow passages and hidden chambers extending deep into the mountainside. These geological features were entirely absent from any topographic maps and showed no signs of previous exploration by hikers or researchers. The rock itself was unusual, darker than the surrounding stone, marked with natural formations that eerily resembled deliberate carvings. Inside the largest chamber, approximately 30 meters from the entrance, we found what appeared to be the Kellerman's final campsite. Their tent was still standing, but it had been damaged in a way that defied all explanation. The fabric was ripped, in long, parallel lines, as if something with sharp claws had raked across it repeatedly. Yet the pattern of damage was too systematic, too extensive to have been caused by any known wildlife in the region. The interior of the tent told a chilling story of desperate struggle. Sleeping bags were twisted, partially pulled outside through the tent entrance, suggesting the occupants had been dragged from their shelter against their will. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the chamber, many showing the same type of heat damage we had observed at the previous campsite. But it was the walls of the chamber that provided the most profoundly disturbing evidence of what had happened to the Kellerman family. Covering nearly every accessible surface were what appeared to be desperate messages, scratched into the stone with sharp objects. The handwriting was clearly recognizable as belonging to Dr. Kellerman, Jennifer, and David. But the content of their messages raised questions our investigation was simply not equipped to answer. The earliest messages, seemingly from Dr. Kellerman, rationally described their arrival at the clearing and their decision to establish an emergency camp after becoming lost during what should have been a routine day hike. These entries were organized, documenting their situation and their plans for signaling rescue teams. But as the messages progressed chronologically, they became increasingly frantic and incoherent. Jennifer's writing described sounds emanating from the forest, sounds that kept them awake throughout the night. Voices calling their names from directions where no human presence was possible. David's contributions mentioned seeing figures moving between the trees, always at the edge of visibility, never close enough to identify, but clearly watching their campsite. The final messages, all apparently scrawled by Dr. Kellerman during what must have been their last night in the chamber, described an organized assault on their position by entities he could not identify or comprehend. His writing grew increasingly erratic as he documented the systematic destruction of their equipment and the gradual, terrifying approach of whatever had been stalking them through the forest. The last legible message, scratched into the stone near the tent entrance, consisted of a single, chilling sentence: "They are not human, and they are not gone." We found no trace of the Kellermans themselves, no bodies, no additional personal belongings, no evidence indicating whether they had left the chamber voluntarily or been removed by force. The scent trail that had led us to their final campsite simply ended at the chamber entrance, as if they had vanished into the stone itself. Our investigation dragged on for another 2 weeks, involving specialists from federal agencies and academic institutions, all hoping to shed light on what we had discovered. Geologists confirmed that the rock formations were natural, but acknowledged that their configuration was highly unusual. Anthropologists examined the chamber walls, finding no historical or cultural precedent for the type of messages the Kellermans had left behind. Most significantly, our consultation with wildlife experts produced absolutely no explanation for the damage patterns we had observed at both campsites. The claw marks on the tent fabric were far too large and systematic to have been made by any known predators in the region. The heat damage to personal items suggested exposure to temperatures that could not possibly be generated by normal camping equipment or natural forest fires. The official report ultimately classified the Kellerman disappearance as a missing persons case with unknown circumstances. We meticulously documented our findings but made no attempt to speculate about the cause of their disappearance or the unsettling meaning of the messages they had left behind. The case remains open, a cold file in our system, though no additional resources have been allocated to active investigation. What I have never reported, and what I never will report, is the profound impact this case had on the members of our search team who spent extended time in that chamber, documenting the evidence we found. Within 6 months of the Kellerman investigation, 3 of our most experienced personnel had requested transfers to other units or resigned from law enforcement entirely. Two others required extended medical leave for stress-related conditions their doctors simply could not adequately explain. The canine handlers reported that their dogs had never fully recovered from their experience in that forest and eventually had to be retired from search operations, their once reliable instincts tainted by an unseen terror. I myself have experienced unsettling changes, ones I directly attribute to whatever dark presence we encountered during that investigation. I no longer sleep soundly in wilderness environments. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig sends a jolt of anxiety through me. I find myself constantly alert for sounds that might indicate the presence of something that shouldn't exist, not in our world, not even in the deepest, most uncivilized parts of it. Most troubling is my growing, gnawing awareness that our established search and rescue protocols are fundamentally inadequate for situations that fall outside the normal parameters of human experience. The chamber where we found the Kellerman's final campsite has been sealed, removed from all official maps and GPS databases. The area is now classified as geologically unstable and strictly off-limits to recreational activities. Park rangers have been explicitly instructed to redirect hikers away from any routes that might lead them toward those chilling rock formations. I continue to lead search and rescue operations throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains, but I have implemented new protocols that prioritize team safety above all else, even above investigation completeness. We no longer follow scent trails that deviate from established path systems, and we terminate searches immediately if our K9 units display any signs of unusual agitation or fear. This experience has taught me that some missing persons cases are better left unsolved, and some questions about what truly happens in remote wilderness areas are better left unasked. Their answers far too terrifying to bear. The Kellerman family taught us a brutal lesson. Our ancient mountains hold secrets that our training, our experience, and our very understanding of the natural world have utterly failed to prepare us to confront. I pray with a dread I cannot articulate that we never, ever encounter another case like theirs. I reached a small clearing about 8 kilometers from the main trail where I found their campsite. Jennifer and David had chosen a level area near a small stream, adhering to all the best backcountry practices for water access and drainage. But something had gone terribly, horrifyingly wrong here. The tent was still standing, but the rainfly had been torn away, crumpled against a nearby tree. The tent zippers were closed, but when I examined the interior, I found clear signs of a violent struggle. Sleeping bags were twisted and pulled partially out of the tent. David's backpack was overturned, its contents strewn across the tent floor. Jennifer's hiking boots were inside, but her jacket and pack were nowhere to be found. Most disturbing, however, was the damage to the tent floor, which displayed long, parallel tiers, as if something with impossibly sharp claws had ripped across the fabric from underneath. I immediately called for backup and established a perimeter, desperate to preserve any evidence. While waiting for the search team, I conducted a careful examination of the area around the tent. The strange tracks were everywhere, circling the campsite in patterns that suggested systematic stalking behavior. Whatever had made them had approached from multiple directions, clearly spending considerable time observing the camp before moving in. I found drag marks leading away from the tent towards the deeper forest, a chilling pattern that suggested something had been pulled rather than carried, leaving deep furrows in the soft earth and scattered pine needles. I followed the trail for about 50 meters before losing it in a rocky area where the ground was too hard to show clear impressions. The official search lasted 6 grueling days, involving over 30 personnel, including K9 units, helicopter support, and expert trackers. We found additional scattered evidence of Jennifer and David's presence. Jennifer's jacket, torn and stained with what appeared to be blood, was discovered hanging from a branch nearly 4 kilometers from their campsite. David's water bottle was found even further away, dented and partially buried under a pile of leaves that looked deliberately arranged. But we never found them. The search was officially suspended after 8 days when weather conditions deteriorated and the risk to additional personnel became too great. The case remains open, classified as a presumed wilderness accident with no specific cause of death determined. What I never included in my official report were the other things we found. The consistent discovery of those same elongated tracks at multiple locations throughout the search area, always leading deeper into the wilderness and away from any established trails. The strange arrangements of rocks and branches we encountered in several places, constructed in patterns too deliberate to be natural, but serving no apparent purpose. The whispered reports from other search team members of feeling watched while working in certain areas, and the consistent, inexplicable problems we had with electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific geographic locations. Most significantly, I never reported what I found on the final day of the search, when I was working alone in a remote sector nearly 10 kilometers from the original campsite. Following a faint game trail through a particularly dense part of the forest, I came across what I can only describe as a collection site. In a natural depression surrounded by massive oak trees, someone or something had painstakingly gathered objects that clearly didn't belong in the wilderness. There were pieces of camping equipment from multiple sources, some so weathered and faded they had obviously been there for years. Backpack straps, tent stakes, water bottles, and hiking boots, all arranged in neat piles as if sorted by type. Among these grim trophies, I recognized David's distinctive red hiking hat and Jennifer's metal camp cup, both placed carefully on a flat rock in the center of the depression. But what made me immediately radio for extraction and swear I would never return to that area was the chilling realization that many of the other items predated Jennifer and David's disappearance by years, possibly decades. I found tent fabric in colors and patterns that hadn't been manufactured in over 20 years, hiking boots in styles that went out of production in the 1990s, and water bottles bearing logos of companies that had gone out of business before I even became a ranger. I have never spoken about what I found in that depression, and I instructed the helicopter pilot to mark our extraction point as inaccessible due to terrain concerns. The official report lists the area as unsearched, and I have no intention of correcting that record. 3 years later, I still patrol the Appalachian Trail system, but I have never again taken an assignment in the eastern sectors near Dead Man's Ford. When new rangers inquire about the area, I tell them it's too remote and dangerous for routine patrol. When hikers ask about Eastern Trail access, I redirect them to better maintained routes with more reliable communication coverage. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm working late at the ranger station, I review the missing person reports from my district going back decades. The pattern is there if you know what to look for. Experienced hikers who vanished without explanation, always in the same general area, always leaving behind campsites that show signs of disturbance but no clear evidence of what happened. I'm scheduled to retire in 2 years, and I've already begun training my replacement. But there are some things I will never pass on, some knowledge that dies with the person who carries it. The Eastern Trails will remain officially accessible because closing them would require explanations I'm not prepared to give, but I sleep better knowing that soon. Whatever is out there in those ancient woods will be someone else's responsibility to ignore. The vastness of the wilderness holds secrets far older and more profound than any human can comprehend. It hums with an ancient, patient energy that predates our maps and our understanding, a primal force that merely tolerates our fleeting presence. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, I feel the immense weight of that ignorance, the unsettling truth that we are merely guests in a world governed by rules we cannot fathom. This isn't just about missing hikers anymore. It's about the unsettling knowledge that our civilized world, with its neat reports and scientific explanations, is built upon a thin, fragile crust, beneath which lurks something utterly alien and terrifyingly efficient. The woods don't just conceal, they consume. They watch, they wait, and they remember. And for some of us, that memory becomes a living scar, a constant reminder of the impenetrable darkness at the heart of the wild, a darkness that I, for one, am no longer equipped to face. Abandoning their trucks and most of their gear at a staging area eerily similar to our own. The official story, whispered through generations of loggers, was that they'd gotten lost in a dense fog and tumbled into one of the countless abandoned mine shafts riddling the area. Their bodies were never recovered. The case closed as a tragic industrial accident. But finding their chainsaw, after all these years, in such pristine, working condition, it clawed open a Pandora's box of questions none of us dared voice aloud. Friday morning delivered the final, terrifying blow, the incident that tore up our contract and sent us scrambling from those mountains. Our equipment only half-loaded, our work utterly abandoned. I was wielding my steel MS-660, a beast of a professional-grade saw I'd trusted for over 5 years, preparing to fell a colossal red oak that stood in solitary grandeur in a small clearing. This tree was an ancient sentinel, likely 150 years old, its trunk nearly 4 feet thick, its majestic canopy dominating the forest around it. Our survey had marked it as the largest specimen on the property, promising premium lumber if we could only bring it down safely. I executed my initial notch cut flawlessly, creating the wedge that would dictate its colossal fall. The saw screamed perfectly, the chain bit deep and true, the cut progressing exactly as planned. I moved around to the back of the trunk to begin the crucial felling cut. That's when my chainsaw died mid-cut. Not a sputter, not a cough, not a gradual fade. It simply stopped. Abruptly, as if an unseen hand had thrown a switch, the engine falling into such an absolute silence that I nearly lost my footing from the sudden, jarring absence of resistance. I furiously tried the electric start, then yanked the pull cord. I checked the fuel, the spark plug. Everything looked utterly normal, but the saw was dead. Jake rushed over with his backup, a smaller Husqvarna that should have easily finished the job. It started with a reassuring roar, running smoothly, until the very instant its chain kissed the bark of that great oak. Then it died exactly as mine had. Tommy tried his with identical chilling results. Even the old Morrison chainsaw we'd found, which had shown signs of life, suffered the same instantaneous, inexplicable failure the moment it contacted that cursed tree. We spent a frantic 2 hours trying to troubleshoot equipment that had been flawlessly operational just minutes before. We checked fuel lines, cleaned carburetors, tested ignition systems, verified mixtures. Each saw would start, hum, and run perfectly right up until we attempted to make a cut into that specific tree, at which point they all instantly, utterly ceased to function. And then the sound began. It rumbled from the deep, impenetrable heart of the forest, a low, rhythmic pounding, like a gargantuan drumbeat echoing through the earth. It was an organic sound, not mechanical, with irregular, unsettling intervals that ruled out any man-made machinery. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere all at once, utterly defying any attempt to pinpoint its source or distance. As we stood frozen in that clearing, surrounded by our now useless tools, listening to that inexplicable primal thrum, Jake's voice cut through the air, hoarse with terror. He pointed. My blood ran ice cold. The very symbols he'd discovered carved into the earlier oak were now, before our horrified eyes, appearing on the trunk of this ancient sentinel. They weren't being etched by any visible tool. Instead, they simply manifested, as if they had always existed, merely choosing this moment to become visible. Dark lines seemed to bleed slowly upwards from deep within the wood itself, forming the exact geometric patterns Jake had tried to photograph, but larger, more intricate, and pulsing with a palpable dark energy. In mere minutes, the entire circumference of the trunk was consumed by these alien glyphs. The drumming grew closer, more intense, a deafening throb that shook the very air. Small rocks and pine needles on the forest floor began to vibrate, dancing with each beat. Then, our equipment, which had been utterly dead moments before, suddenly roared to life on its own. Chainsaws, untouched, sprang to full throttle, their blades screaming at nothing. The skidder's engine coughed, then caught, idling loudly without a driver. The generators whined into furious operation, all without a living soul laying a hand on them. We didn't think. We simply ran. A primal instinctual terror seized us. We grabbed only our personal tools, scrambling into our trucks, and didn't dare stop until the tires hit the blessed asphalt of the main highway, 20 harrowing minutes later. When Tommy finally managed to steady his hands enough to call our contact at Pinnacle Lumber, intending to inform them we were terminating the contract immediately, the news he received chilled us to the bone in a different way. He was told the development company had dissolved 3 days prior, and that no one had ever authorized any logging operations on that specific property. The job, the company, the contract, it had all been a phantom. We never went back. Not for our generators, not for the skidder, not for the processed timber we'd left stacked neatly. 6 months later, Jake, still haunted, drove past the access road. He reported that our staging area was completely consumed by the forest, overgrown as if decades, not mere months, had passed. There was no trace of our heavy machinery, no sign of the felled lumber. Nothing. It had all simply vanished. I still work these Appalachian Mountains, still feel the bite of the saw and the sweat on my brow. But I've learned a humility that only true terror can teach. I've learned to recognize the ancient, unspoken signs that tell you, with chilling certainty, when a forest does not merely prefer, but demands not to be disturbed. Some trees are not just wood and fiber. They are monuments, sentinels, meant to stand forever, guarding secrets older than memory. And some sounds in the wilderness, some whispers from the deep, are not meant for human ears, nor are they ever meant to be investigated. The Morrison logging crew learned that agonizing lesson 15 years too late, swallowed by a silence no fog or mine shaft could truly explain. We, the McLeod crew, were luckier, or just perhaps we were finally, desperately, better at listening to the warnings that others, to their eternal sorrow, had tragically ignored. The memory of those days, the symbols bleeding into the bark, the rhythmic pounding shaking the very ground, it's etched into my soul. Sometimes, especially when the wind sighs through the ancient pines, I can almost hear that drumming again, faint but persistent. It reminds me that these mountains hold more than just timber and hidden hollows. They hold an intelligence, a power far beyond our comprehension. What we encountered wasn't a beast or a ghost. It felt like the very consciousness of the land rising to protect itself, a force that simply unmade our reality. I often wonder what happened to the Morrison crew. Did they face the same pulsing symbols, the same maddening sounds, the same unholy resurrection of their own equipment? Or did the forest simply welcome them into its depths, absorbing them as it did our skidders and generators, leaving no trace? My hands still bear the calluses of a logger, but my eyes see the forest differently now. I see its warnings, its ancient wisdom, its quiet, terrifying power. I've become a different kind of woodsman, one who understands that some riches are not for harvesting, and some stories are best left untold, buried deep beneath the moss and loam where they belong. The Appalachians, I've come to believe, are not just a collection of trees and rock. They are a living, breathing entity, and sometimes they breathe fire,